Welcome back, and I trust you enjoyed the Stacy experience. Ideally, you collapsed one or more crescendos. They went to zero for you. Whether or not you did that, however, you are likely to have had questions, because after all, this is your first experience with this, your first time with the pace of how this tapping goes, your first time actually of sitting in front of a video screen and tapping along with somebody you don't even know, on stage, with the idea that that's going to collapse important emotional issues of your own. Okay, so hopefully you were addressing a true crescendo, and you were getting yourself out of the way. You were relaxing. You were enjoying it. You weren't getting all tied up with the pace of things as they were going and doing it right and all that kind of thing. As soon as you get that kind of resistance, that kind of uptightness about the process, some unconscious defenses come about, and could thwart the process. So you want to make sure you have the right crescendo and you're relaxed. Now, what we're going to do here in part 2 is we're going to go over some common questions and answers that newcomers have to all of this. Some other ways to go about this if you're not quite getting your result that you thought you might get. And we're going to spend at the end of this a little time with how to use borrowing benefits for physical issues, for addictions and overweight, and for phobias. But first, those common questions. A commonly asked question has to do with the relationship between the crescendos you're working on and the issues that are being worked on stage. Should they be the same or related somehow, or should they be totally different? And the answer is that there is a great advantage, to viewing ones that are totally different from your crescendo. While you can certainly get results by doing one that's parallel to yours, please know that as you go through these videos, you're going to find me coming at all these different issues and crescendos and specific events from all these different angles and approaches. There must be 30 or 40 different approaches used throughout all these videos. And each of those is designed not only to help the person on stage, but to help your system draw parallels you never even thought possible or even thought related. And as a result, that's why sometimes you'll come up with some issue, whoa, you didn't even think you had. Very important part of this process. So while the tendency, the temptation is to say, look at these videos and say, well, oh, that one's like mine. I better go for that one first because that's like mine. And that's kind of what your common sense tells you. We're telling you to go the other direction. First of all, you should do all of these in the order presented. But don't shy away from some because they seem to be like nothing close to your particular issue. So one of the phrases we use for all of these videos is that they are universally useful. I don't care what crescendo or event or issue you're dealing with, any of those videos is likely to be useful to you. Now, another question that gets asked is, well, are these reusable? I mean, like once I've seen one, like now that you've seen Stacy, could you use that again on some other crescendos? Of course. You can use them over and over and over again, all of them. So you have a lifetime, of videos that can help you along in this process. Now let's address what happens if you've been doing borrowing benefits and the 0 to 10 intensity on your crescendo just is not moving or not moving very much. Maybe you start with a 9, it goes to an 8, back to a 9, 8, 7, 8, maybe doing something, but little or nothing. Well, that's contrary to our expectations. We expect you to get down to a low number, if not to 0, pretty much across the board on all these crescendos. So what might be happening? Well, one of the things that could well be happening here is that behind the scenes and without your awareness, you are shifting crescendos. We call that sometimes shifting aspects. And let me give you a story that will bring this home to you. I dealt with a lady that had an automobile accident maybe 10 or 12 years prior to the time her and I got together. And this was very intense for her. She had a very hard time getting in cars, always white knuckles, this kind of thing, and it was affecting her life no end. And so I asked her about this specific event, this car accident. And I says, what about the specific event bothers you the most? Now here I'm looking for a crescendo, aren't I? And she says, oh, the headlights. I can still see the headlights coming at me. All right, so we began to use EFT, you could use borrowing benefits, on this crescendo known as the headlights coming at me. I mean, that's a couple of seconds, right? And so we did that, and then I asked her the question. I said, well, how is the accident now? Now, in retrospect, I asked the wrong question. You'll see why in a moment. She said, oh, it's no different. It's no different. Oh, and she was emotionally intense about that. And so then I said, so the headlights still bother you? She said, oh, no. I mean, she passed those headlights off like they were nothing, okay? That was a crescendo. We actually collapsed. What she did was she switched to another crescendo in the same specific event, and that was the screams in the car. She said, oh, the screams in the car, I can still hear them, and they were causing her intensity. That's another crescendo. But you see, she's inexperienced at this process, and she did not distinguish between one crescendo and another, even though it may seem obvious here. It's not obvious to the newcomer doing this. It will be after a while. So ask yourself, did you switch crescendos? Did you do that? When you go back and look at your specific event and your crescendo, is this crescendo now any different than it was to begin with? Go back and look at the original crescendo and evaluate that on a scale of 0 to 10 and tell me what that number is. So write that number down for yourself. Okay. Now, if it is still a high number, well, something else may have happened. You may have actually be on the very same crescendo, but you may have changed emotions about it. It may have been fear to begin with, and now it's anger. Okay? Or it may have been anger to begin with, and now it's sadness. You see? And so when you first start with this, you want to make sure that you got that crescendo down pretty well, because if you're starting off with fear, tap, 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 borrow benefits, and now you're ending up with sadness, go back and look at what the fear was. If the fear is 0, you shifted now to another piece of that, in this case, crescendo. Because some of these crescendos can have more than one piece, or you can shift to other crescendos, within it. So you need to be aware of the crescendo you're addressing, and when you go back to assess its 0 to 10 intensity, you want to make sure that you're looking at the crescendo as it was when you started. If that crescendo has changed, that means you did something worthwhile with the original crescendo, the original specific event. Just be aware of that, because that's a very common area. Many times people are getting results, but they're not realizing it because they're not used to how this process unfolds and what happens behind the scenes sometimes. So, did you shift aspects, crescendos? Did you shift emotions within it? Take a look at that. Sometimes we're not making any headway on our crescendo, not for the reasons I just mentioned, but sometimes because it reminds us of something else. Sometimes there's something else way back in the past that is more foundational to the specific event that we're dealing with. Now, at this point with you as a beginner at this, you may not be able to distinguish that well. And I'm not really teaching you how to do that because I don't need to. If the first two items I mentioned about this particular problem, that is not moving any place on your 0 to 10 intensity for your crescendo, don't seem to be the problem, well, this other one may well be. And what you need to do in that case is just take that crescendo, put it aside. Take other crescendos and start working on them, and you'd be surprised how many of these crescendos are related over time. And after you've done 5 or 10 other crescendos, probably successfully, then go get that crescendo you're having a hard time working on, put that one down there, and chances are it's gone. I mean, it's even a 0 now, or it will respond much more readily, to the process. Every once in a while, I hear a borrowing benefits client say to me something like, well, Gary, I have a hard time borrowing benefits on my specific events and my crescendos because I don't remember any of them. Well, maybe they just simply don't remember, and maybe events that have happened in their past are so traumatic and so intense that their system suppresses them, represses them, does not want them to remember them for their own protection. Okay? So I have suggestions there. The first one, of course, is to have professional help if you happen to be in that category. But the other one, if you just simply can't remember one and you'd like to have a really juicy one, make it up. Very important concept. Make it up. Well, that may seem like fictional to you to begin with, and in a way it is. In another way, it's not fictional at all because it's coming from you. You can make up this specific event that has the right characters in it, with the right intensities, the right crescendos, the right actions, the right words, and so on. And that one can be so representative of a big global issue or a tabletop that just collapsing that one may either collapse that tabletop, or it can start allowing you to remember other specific events, real ones if you will, that would be helpful in this process. So, if you don't remember any specific events or any crescendos, make them up. Another inquiry that shows up from time to time is someone who says, well, Gary, I understand borrowing benefits in its power, but I have a difficult time doing it because when I think about my specific events, I don't have any feelings about them. They don't go to a 0 or excuse me, a 9 or a 10 or an 8 or a 7 or some other intense number for me. They're just sort of all quite level. Now, it may be someone does not really have these feelings about these things. On the other hand, the mere fact that somebody would be watching borrowing benefits is evidence of the fact that there's something going on in their life that they needs to be corrected. Now, sometimes we suppress these feelings, again for our own protection. And if that's your case, I want to urge you once again to seek professional help before you go any farther with the borrowing benefits. On the other hand, if you want a substitute way to assess how well you're doing with these, if you do not start with an intense number like a 7, 8, and if you start with a 0 and you end at a 0, you don't really have any way of knowing how well you did. So I'm going to give you a way to address that. And that's what I call movie details. If you'll take a look at a specific event, that you know is bothersome to you, you don't have any feelings about it, but you wish it hadn't happened. Close your eyes and run this movie, if you will, and notice the movie details. Are you, for example, a participant in the movie, or are you in a movie theater watching the movie up on a screen? Is the movie in color? Is it in black and white? Are the characters big and close to you, or are they small and more distant? Is it clear, or is it fuzzy? Take a look at those, and chances are it's big, and it's big, and you're in the movie, and it's in color and in your face, and all of that. Chances are, but take a look at that, and just notice those details. You might even want to write them down. Okay? Then do borrowing benefits, a few rounds of borrowing benefits. And as you're assessing it, instead of assessing it on a scale of 0 to 10, since you are unable to do that, take a look at the movie details. Is it less bright? Are you in the movie theater watching the movie? Are the figures more distant from you? Is it in black and white? Is it fuzzy? Are you having a hard time even seeing the movie to begin with? Those are all evidence that this specific event you're dealing with is fading for you. So that's a good tool to use. You may also find as you do this a while and notice some of your specific events fading on you in this way, you may also find that you are taking care of other issues behind the scenes that is now allowing you to actually have intensity, some more normal feelings about some of the other specific events in your life. And if that occurs, then you can go ahead and do borrowing benefits in a more normal fashion. The other thing that you can do, is to make a priority list. What I mean by that is go back over your past, and even though you don't have emotional intensity about these things, list all these movie titles that you have that you wish did not happen. The time my father did this, the time I did this and wish I hadn't, the time my mother said so-and-so, the time this, the time that, the time something else. All these little movies. Make a bunch of movies. And then as you look at these list of movies, pick out the one that intuitively to you seems to be the most intense, seems to be the worst, even though you don't have a feeling about it. It just seems to be the worst, okay? And then use that one and go ahead and do borrowing benefits for a few rounds, and then come back the next day. And then look at your list and pick out the one that seems the worst. Chances are the one you picked yesterday will not be the same one you picked today. Why? Because borrowing benefits has indeed, behind the scenes, without you even knowing what the 0 to 10 intensities were, has helped collapse it. And so you'll pick out another one. You'll do borrowing benefits on that. Come back the next day. Chances are you'll pick out another one, okay? And after a while, as you start to unload some of these specific events on you, you will then again have more normal feelings about these things and can proceed on with borrowing benefits in the usual way. As you may recall from part 1 of these instructional videos, I made mention of the fact that some people doing borrowing benefits unexpectedly come across a very intense issue. It just sort of shows up in the process. Sometimes it's a memory that they didn't even remember or didn't even know they had. Sometimes it's a memory they thought they had taken care of with conventional counseling, but apparently not, because it shows up here. Now, aside, again, from seeking professional counsel, there's something else you can do there that may be of immense value. This is and what I'm telling you here is what I've seen a lot of people do and have done very successfully. And that is you just turn off your video screen. It's no longer there in front of you, but your emotional intensity about this issue, even if you're not able to articulate it, is still there front and center. And what you do then is, since your system is tuned into it, the zzz are going on, the disruption is all over the place, you just start tapping up and down the body. You just do like this, do like I'm doing here. This is the same thing you're already used to, okay? Then you go back up the body like this, and you just keep going up and down, up and down, up and down, back and forth, back and up and down. In fact, if you don't want to go up and down, you can just go one way. You start over here, go all the way down, then start here, and go all the way down, start here, and go all the way down. The point is to keep tapping and tapping and tapping, because these disruptions that are in your system are begging to be addressed. They're there. Tap, 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 tap. Again, with the presence and guidance of a skilled professional. What may well happen there is you may collapse some very important events, maybe an entire tabletop, or even maybe more than 1 or 2 tabletops, and you may or may not be able to even articulate what is going on. And done successfully, there is great relief in that. From time to time on these videos, you may notice the onstage client going through a sigh, they go, like that. Happens with some frequency. Sometimes I'll point it out to them. Sometimes you may see me go, in a way to point it out to the audience as a teaching device. See, what's happening there is that's a sign, typically, of emotional relaxation. You sigh because there was tension and now there isn't. That tends to be what a sigh is all about. Okay. I point that out so you'll know what that is along the way as you happen to see it. And if you sigh yourself, just notice. A lot of times these sighs will just go on. You won't even notice them because you're not used to the process yet. But after a while, you notice them, and that for you is a sign of emotional relaxation, and it's just a really nice feature to be aware of.
This headache.
This headache.
This headache.
Raise your arm. Sorry. This headache.
This headache.
Are you still a 6?
No.
What is it?
It's not there.
It's gone?
Yeah.
Although I'm going to share with you now uses of borrowing benefits for physical issues, I need to tell you up front that I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, I know nothing about medicines. I've never even had a course in anatomy. What I'm going to give you here are my own observations on all of this, and how you might use this, because we get results with physical things that are just sometimes jaw-dropping, and I don't think the medical model has a way to explain them. Nonetheless, you need to pass whatever you take from this, by your physician before using it. Now, one of the things I want to point out that I think I know about the medical model is that the chemistry in our body changes depending on the type of emotions we're having. For example, if we're having joy and love, we have one form of chemistry, which I'm going to just call positive chemistry for lack of a more sophisticated term. On the other hand, if we're having fear, anger, and hate as emotions, that's another kind of chemistry, and it's quite different. That's the negative chemistry, and it's quite different from the positive chemistry I spoke about earlier. And one of the things that appears to happen is that when we're having negative chemistry, that appears to cause or contribute to physical symptoms, physical ailments, physical disease. Now, I don't know if that's in medical books or not, but I've had lots of discussions with lots of people, and intuitively, people know or sense that their own negative emotions cause things like headaches and ulcers and even cancer. One thing I can tell you for sure is that as we resolve people's emotional issues, we have seen repeatedly their physical issues start to fade. And we've seen it a lot, just not once in a while, but it's just happened a lot, and some of it is basically astonishing. What I want to do here is give you two ways to approach physical issues using borrowing benefits. And one of those ways is just to make a parallel with your physical issue as though it was a specific event, and address it the same way you would a specific event, using borrowing benefits. Example, let's say the physical issue is a headache, and let's just say that headache specifically shows up as being a sharp pain behind the eyebrows. Let's just assume that for a moment. So you would write down as your specific event that specific symptom, sharp pain behind my eyebrows. And on a scale of 0 to 10, we'll estimate that as an 8. So you'd write that down as an 8. Right? Then you will borrow benefits. And when it says to pause and assess, you will then assess, how is that sharp pain behind your eyebrows? It is still an 8. And what may happen is something like this. You may say, well, actually, no, that's a 0, but my headache has shifted. I still have my headache, but it's shifted. It's now a dull throb in the back of my head. I don't know how that happened, but it did. It happens a lot, by the way. And that's maybe a 6. So now you write down dull throb in back of my head, 6. All right. Borrow benefits, pause and assess, and say, well, how is that now? Well, okay, it's better. It's still there. It's still that dull throb in the back of my head, but it's a 4. Write down the 4. Borrow benefits. Well, okay, and assess. Let's see. That seems to be gone. But now I have this ache, this dull ache, at the top of my forehead, and that's about a 2. Dull ache in top of forehead, 2. Okay. Borrow benefits. Assess again. Gee, headache seems to be gone. Now, does it always work just that way? No. I mean, it unfolds all kinds of different ways, but the way I just gave you is somewhat typical of what happens. Okay. So that'll be fine. So if you have a physical symptom like that, you can address it in that fashion. If you get relief, great. However, you may not get relief. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. If you don't, the next avenue to go after would be to make the assumption that there's an emotional driver behind that, something unresolved, some kind of emotion you have that is actually causing that headache, even though you're not able to really know what that is necessarily. But I have a question that I often ask in that circumstance, which often is very effective in finding out what that real driver is. And the question goes like this. If there was an emotional contributor to that headache or pain or whatever symptom there may be, what could it be? Now, sometimes people say, well, I don't know. And then I say, just guess. And I'm telling you, if you don't know, to guess. Guess at what it could be. And you'd be surprised how accurate your guesses often are. Okay? Let me give you an example. This is a true story that happened several years ago. I was giving a workshop in a therapist's home who invited 20 other therapists to learn about this technique. And many of them brought their clients with them because they wanted to have me apply what I was doing to these clients just to assess what was going on, And so I remember one of the clients was a lady, about 40 years old, who had been in a very serious automobile accident 2 years prior. 2 years prior to the time we had met at this session. And as a result of that accident, she had a metal plate in her neck. I remember that. And she also had a pain in her right arm, in her shoulder actually, that was always at a 9 or 10. It didn't matter what she did with her arm, whether it went up like this or down like this, it was always a 9 or 10. It was 9 or 10 in the shower. It was a 9 or 10 when she woke up at night. It was a 9 or 10 when she drove. It was always a 9 or 10. It had been that way for 2 years. Constant pain. And so we applied EFT to it. You would apply borrowing benefits. It went no place. Nowhere. Still a 9 or 10. I did 2 or 3 rounds. Nowhere. Okay. So then I asked her the question. I said, if there was an emotional contributor to that shoulder pain, what could it be? And she had no problem finding it, by the way. I mean, her face instantly got reddish. The veins on her neck stood out. And she said, I am so angry at the other drivers, the doctors and lawyers involved, and so on. I mean, she was just furious. So we started using EFT, or borrowing benefits in your case, on that. And after 2 or 3 rounds of it, it went to 0. First time in 2 years. It went to, no problem. Ooh, gee, nothing. Even tried to make it hurt and couldn't do it. Okay? And we got a call from her therapist 2 months later, saying that it not only had it dropped to 0, it had stayed 0 for that full 2 months, and she was out writing about it, on the internet someplace. Okay? Now that's a great illustration of how our emotional issues often drive our physical symptoms. And so what you might do is ask yourself that question. Come up with whatever emotional issue it may be. Come up with 2 or 3 or 4 if you want. Reduce those to specific events, and then borrow benefits on them as you've already been doing. And chances are you'll begin to get relief. Now, if you still don't get relief, I need to tell you that there are some other uses of EFT, not borrowing benefits, where you could go a step farther and have things be more elegant, have a better chance of getting to them. That's outside the scope of borrowing benefits. Again, if you are a serious student and want to learn these things, you can learn them through the video sets that are affordably presented on our website.
I'm 0.
All right. Would you mind tasting the wine for me and tell me if you notice if it still tastes the same?
It tastes the same, but I don't really feel like drinking it. The main reasons I wanted to do this workshop is I wanted to get my weight down. I had control of my weight. And so I've been working on it since I've been here. And I noticed this morning when I was at the bakery, I didn't want anything. And then when I went to lunch, I went to one of my favorite restaurants across the road there, and I was eating it, but I didn't finish it.
Now it's time to discuss the use of borrowing benefits for addictions and overweight. Actually, I put addictions and overweight in the same basket because in a broad sense they are very similar, with overweight being an addiction to food, and it shows up as more weight on the body than we carry. In some cases there are other reasons for overweight besides that, but most of the overweight falls into the addiction category. So and I'm going to address those both at the same time. Interestingly enough, if you look behind addictions and addictions to food, you will find that there's a driver to them, and that driver tends to be unresolved emotional issues. I know you've heard that before, but if you'll think about it for a minute, one reason we smoke our cigarettes and drink our alcohol and do the other addictive things that we do is to tranquilize anxiety. That is, we have a lot of unresolved emotional issues that beg for some form of relief. They have not been relieved. They create a current anxiety which we tranquilize by smoking a cigarette or eating that extra food or raiding the refrigerator when we're not even hungry, for example. And so should be no secret here that those emotional drivers are addressable by EFT and borrowing benefits. Now, with that concept in mind, it's a simple step to go from there to say, well, what emotional issues are there in my past that might contribute to my addiction? Well, you may not be able to find that out or to be able to articulate that. It may not be clear to you, or they may be so mixed in with everything else that you just can't separate them out. So one of the things to do is just to make a nice big long list of all the things, crescendos in your life you wish didn't happen, all the abuses and rejections and traumas and fears and so on, and start collapsing them one by one using borrowing benefits. And in the process of that, you're very likely to start getting those overriding anxiety things that tend to want us to go after these tranquilizers, which we call addictive substances. Now, that's very powerful. As a matter of fact, unless that is done, in my experience, we're not going to have permanent weight loss. We're not going to permanently give up our cigarettes or whatever. We'll just shift addictions from alcohol to cigarettes, or from cigarettes to coffee and alcohol and something else, because while we get rid of one, we still have the anxiety left over. We haven't really resolved the basic driver, and so we're going to go after something else. That's why a lot of people who quit smoking pretty quickly gain a lot of weight, because they shifted their addiction, their substance of choice, if you will, their tranquilizer of choice, from cigarettes to food. Happens a lot, and you can see the logic behind that. So, by collapsing the emotional drivers underneath it, which may take you a while, then once that's gone, then it's much easier to be able to get beyond, your basic habit patterns of eating, smoking, and so on, than it would be if you had that driver behind you. Now, the other thing that you can use borrowing benefits for, which is really quite delightful and a big help once you've got the other drivers out of the way, and that's you can almost always take care of the immediate craving you may have for some substance by using borrowing benefits. And what you do, I'm just going to take a cigarette as an example. Let's say you smoke and you want a cigarette. Well, what you do is you have a craving for it. You assess your craving. My craving right now is a 10. I want that cigarette. So you just write down craving for a cigarette, 10. Right? And you start borrowing benefits. And when it says to pause and assess, you look at your cigarette, you say, well, do I want that? Well, it's less. 5. You write down a 5. Borrow benefits, and after 2 or 3 rounds, chances are it's down to a 0 or 1 or some low number where you can just walk away from it. Okay? That doesn't mean the craving won't come back. Typically, the substances in our bodies cause a physical craving and hence add to the addiction. Physical craving is there for, generally speaking, 3 or 4 days. But once you've had abstinence for 3 or 4 days, that substance, the physical part of the craving tends to leave the body, and now you're left only with those emotional drivers. So if you get rid of the emotional drivers, and then you start addressing the physical cravings, because now what you got to do is get over this hump, this physical craving thing. This bit about taking care of the immediate cravings with borrowing benefits is very powerful and very useful, and I hope you use it. Okay, let's give it our shot.
Well, I've never been able to do this.
Now, right now, are you a 1, a 2, a 5? What are you?
I'm about a 0.
About a 0. Okay, now
I don't know what a 0 is because I've never been there before, but I've never been able to lean over the railing.
And how many floors up are we? 3?
3 floors. Plus, I don't feel the anxiety that I'm going to fall.
To address phobias with borrowing benefits is a fairly simple process. First of all, a phobia, just by definition, is an irrational fear. It's an excess fear about something that is just beyond normal, and the person with the phobia knows that. In fact, often feels kind of silly they have the phobia because of that. They can't drive in cars, they can't go up in buildings because they have this fear, this panicky feeling. They can't go in water, and there's over 1,000 phobias I think were listed someplace, claustrophobia is among them, and so on. But to use borrowing benefits for it is relatively simple. What you do is you'll make a list of all of the events you've had in your past where you've had that phobic response. For example, if it is a fear of heights, you would take every example you can think of where you've actually been high someplace and had that feeling. That's a specific event. Reduce it down to the crescendo, borrow benefits on it. Then do another specific event about heights, borrow benefits on it. Crescendo and borrow benefits, and so on it goes. Do the same thing with the fear of public speaking. Remember, every time you got up in front of a group, how you felt. Specific event, specific event, specific event. And just do borrowing benefits on them. You can do that for any phobia you want, and after you have collapsed all of those fearful experiences, all the legs underneath that phobic table, have gone. Simple process. Simple process.